Welcome back to the Bodie Bound studio. Kathy's going to be moving in, and I haven't had a dining room table in years. So she said, why don't we make one? And I said, all right, let's do it. She wanted an ocean theme table, an epoxy and wood table. So we went out and got some pistachio, and here's the video. We had a piece of really nice pistachio. It was quite thick, but I figured it would be perfect if I could split it in half along the length and then use it as the two pieces for the table. There was a little bit of rot and things like that, or at least wormholes, but I could get all that stuff off. I wasn't too worried about it. I have two chainsaws at home, and I couldn't get the gas chainsaw to work, and I wasn't going to spend a lot of time with it, so I measured everything out just to split it down the middle, and got my electric chainsaw, and this is where the problem started. Pistachio wood is incredibly dense wood, and it just was a pain in the ass, and the electric chainsaw just couldn't cut through it no matter what I did. And I probably eventually could have cut through it, but it probably would have taken about 5 days. So I found a guy in Julian that had a sawmill, and we went down there to get that piece cut in half, as well as a number of other pieces, since I was already going down there. More. Okay.
So now you're at 2 3/4.
That's going to be good enough. We're going to just do this cut. Okay. We're going to do it that way. Right about there.
That's an inch and 5/8 right there.
That's
so
an inch and 5/8?
right there.
Let's do it. Yeah,
Okay, all right.
that's good.
All right.
You can see on the right side of the wood there, that was as far as I got with the chainsaw, that slice right there. And I'm just glad I bailed on that and came down to this guy. And of course, you can't leave Julian without stopping by the cafe and getting some apple pie a la mode. I laid out the pieces of wood in different configurations to see which edges I wanted on the chair side, and I ended up picking this one. The first order of business was to take the bark off the edges. Bark doesn't respond too well to epoxy, although I did leave a little bit on there just for looks. And then I had to sand down a lot of the marks from the big saw, from the sawmill, obviously on the top, and a little bit on the bottom. I didn't spend too much time on that. Did a lot of sanding, but I also had to deal with the chainsaw slice, as you'll see coming up. I inserted wood slices into those openings and glued it all up, and then it was just a matter of sanding it all down. There's also a lot of cleaning up to do, all of the little bits of bark and schmutz and stuff like that in every little nook and crevice there. But again, it's all in prep for the epoxy pour because you don't want that stuff floating to the top. Those are those wormholes from before. They leave a lot of sawdust poop that needs to come out too, because that all floats up when you pour the epoxy as well. There was some curling and cupping and things on that wood. It had been drying for a while, but it's still, as dense as it still was a little wonky. So I took a planer and planed it down and sanded it down, and again, more and more and more sanding until it was ready for the studio. This is Sadie, one of the shop cats. But right now, she can't be in here. No, you can't. Come on. Ugh. So what I did first was took a sanding sealer and painted it. I'll seal the wood. That helps you to eliminate bubbles that are going to come up from the resin. And then I did a small mix of epoxy and painted that on top to further seal up the wood. This is obviously the bottom. You can still see the saw lines there. And then, of course, the top piece getting its final little seal. One of the coolest things about pouring epoxy is punching out the bubbles. I created a box here to pour the epoxy, and hadn't done it this way before, but I was really nervous that there might be some epoxy leaks, because as you probably have heard, if you haven't experienced, if epoxy starts running, it's a frickin' mess. But anyway, I was very happy with how this turned out. I had no leaks. Like any project, painting as an example, the prep takes almost longer than the actual work itself. Here I'm clamping down the wood in the event that it wants to float up, sealing the outside of the table with caulking because I didn't want it to run over. At least I was trying to eliminate it. And here's my first pour. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch thick. And I wanted to create kind of a sand look at the bottom, so that's why you see this kind of pearlescent white. After that set a little bit, I put some rocks in, started kind of staging this whole ocean area. And the second pour, I used a little bit of pearl blue just to start to build up the colors. You have to consider each layer of color, even if it's a light color, layers on top of layers on top of layers start to get dark. So you have to kind of consider that as you're thinking about all that thickness of the table. Anyway, so I put a little bit of blue in. You can barely see it here, and as it turned out, I wasn't really that happy with it, so I ended up going in after the fact and as it was starting to set and added some more blue. So I mixed up a little bit of epoxy. This wasn't going to be a solid pour. I just wanted to pour little strands of blue around and mix it in. After that began to set, I started adding then all the shells, the sea glass, the starfish, even a little sand dollar in the middle of the frame there that Kathy got on one of her sailing trips to, I want to say Tahiti. But anyway, I'm just gluing them, super gluing them to set them in place because of course the epoxy will make them float, and I didn't want that to happen. Pour number 3, adding a little bit of blue. Again, keeping it kind of light. I was a little nervous about making it too dark. I've certainly made that mistake on previous projects. Yes, popping bubbles, popping bubbles. They're so fun. I think this is pour number 4. You can see I put a little bit more blue in that last pour before, just to get some variation there. Pour number 5, you can see it's a little greener. I did add green at the end of the pour before, so this is just adding a little bit more green. Kathy had said that Tahiti had more green water and she wanted it to look more like that, so I thought that was a cool idea. This is pour number 6, I think. So with 6 pours, it was time to take it outside to finish up and trim up the edges. And some high and low spots there that I needed to take down. Also, the epoxy had run underneath and had filled up the outside areas that I wanted to, have the live edge. So it was just a matter of cutting those out and then doing a lot of grinding and sanding down of the epoxy. Even though I'm going to put a pour over it, I wanted to smooth it out a little bit and take it down in depth because there was a lot of epoxy there. Sanding, sanding, more sanding. It's pretty much all you do when you do an epoxy table. So back in the studio, this is an overpour, so it's going to go across the top and down the sides. Now that it's all been cleaned up and cut down, that's pour number, that was 7, now it's pour number 8, and I think that's the last one. I had gotten these industrial legs for, probably it was a lathe or some heavy equipment, but these are industrial legs I put on, so that's me just putting the bolt in. Oops. And she is finally finished. I'm so happy with it, how it turned out. And those old chairs were antiques we picked up and refinished and painted black along with the legs. So that wouldn't take away from how beautiful this top is. But now we can have a proper meal. I am really excited about the way it turned out. The swirls of water, the blues and the greens, and all of the shells and starfish and sea glass and cool rocks and things that are in there. Thanks for watching.